So as we move away from the customary unit of measure, we now move into what's called the metric system, or also it's referred to as international system of measurements. So like I said, all the rest of the world pretty much uses customary or uses the metric system. US is more of a customary unit, but like I said, since everybody's interrelated, you can't be isolated in this world anymore economically. So the metric system is another system that we have to be familiar with as well. So what's really cool is they have these prefixes that are what we basically call powers of 10. It kind of mirrors our number system. So remember our number system, we have what's called the ones place, then tens, hundreds, thousands, so forth and so on. And the metric system, they have, again, the ones place, there's no prefix. Then you have the tens place, which they use the prefix deca for power of 10. Hecto is like be 10 times 10, or 10 squared would be then, hecto would be hundreds. 10 to the third would be, as remember how we did change bases and stuff earlier? We talked about that a little bit. Notice how 10 to the third would be what the prefix kilo means, 1,000 times bigger. So deca is 10 times bigger than the units place. Hecto is 100 times bigger than the units place. Kilo is 1,000 times bigger than the units place. And then we have what's called the decimal point. And then to the right decimal point, we have these powers of 10. But notice how we have tenths, hundreds, and thousands. So this is a 10th time smaller, 100th time smaller, and 1,000th time smaller. Remember, 1/10 means to divide by 10. Hundredths means to divide by, instead of multiplying by 100, we could be dividing by 100. Those are equivalent. And thousands means to divide by 1,000 or multiply by 1,000. Those are equivalent. So deci is a 10th concept, centi is a 100th concept, and a milli is a 1,000th concept. So these prefixes come in really handy. And then we have basically these units of measurement. Meter, you probably are familiar with. That's going to be what they use for measuring length or distance. Gram is used for mass or weight, and then liter is used for capacity or volume. So these become what we call our base units of measurement. They have no prefixes. So if we put prefixes on them, then they become different units of measurement. So as I said, we have these prefixes where, again, we're just mainly going to focus on this part of it here, from milli down to kilo. We're just going to be in this area here. So we're going to just focus on this range. But if you're in electronics and stuff, you may have been exposed out past that, in form of computers. I hear this prefix, when I first did a computer, there was a kilobyte, then there was a megabyte, a gigabyte, and now there's this terabyte, But now we hardly ever hear about kilobyte. We usually just see these three in computers. In medicines and science, you may have heard of a nanobot, micro and stuff like that. Those are some really small ones there. So, but mainly what we're just going to be dealing with are these prefixes: milli, centi, deci. And then, like I said, this is where the ones place comes in. No prefixes in between there. Then you're going to have this deca, hecto, and kilo. So these become our prefixes. So when it comes to units of length, we have what's called a meter. A meter, if you aren't really sure what a meter is, we bring it back to customary. There's this thing called a yardstick, which we may have. Now they're most commonly you will see is what's called a meter stick in most high schools. You probably won't see very many yardsticks, but when we were growing up, you may be more familiar with a yardstick. Anyway, a yard and a meter are very closely related. A meter is just a little bit longer than a yard. So if you take a really big, long stride, that's basically like a meter. It's kind of an exaggerated stride. So a meter is used when you're measuring like the heights of mountains or heights of buildings or the heights of power lines and things like that. That's meter measurement. Now, if I put the prefix kilo in front of it, we have what's called a kilometer. A kilometer is very similar to like miles. They're used to measure long distances. So a lot of times, if you have cars, it'll register in miles, but also it can be measured in kilometers or kilometers. So it's used to measure longer distances. So notice that a kilometer is 1,000 times bigger than a kilometer, or 1,000 times bigger than a meter. So 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters, is what that's essentially saying. It's 1,000 times bigger than a meter. Another common measure of distance is what we call centimeter. Centimeters are used like for measuring the width of tires, or if you're dealing with clothing, a lot of times your waistlines and things like that are measured in centimeters. Computer screens are measured in centimeters and things like that. Basically, a centimeter is like the width of a paperclip, or if you hold your pinky out, your pinky would be considered a good approximation for a centimeter. So that's about how big a centimeter is. A thumb is a good approximation for an inch. So notice that my pinky would take 2 pinkies to equal 1 thumb. So as an estimation, 2 centimeters is close to 1 inch. So that's how wide or how long a centimeter is. It's used to measure things like this: tire sizes, clothing, monitors on computer screens. So meters, like we said, we measure heights of mountains and buildings and power lines. Kilometers measures great distances like mileage maps. Centimeters measures things that are like normal things you'd buy around the house, see around the house, or more than that. The other common unit to measure in meters is what's called the millimeter. So mm for millimeter. A millimeter is very, very thin. It's the thickness of a dime or the thickness of a credit card. You probably can find a credit card thickness quicker than you have a dime. Most of us don't even carry change anymore in our pockets. But millimeters are used to measure small things. So like nuts and bolts are usually measured in millimeters. Small critters like insects are usually measured in millimeters as well. So millimeters are used to measure smaller things. So a unit of weight or mass is what's called grams. So a gram is basically like 2 paper clips. So it's used to measure kind of light things. A lot of times, if you watch the British cooking show and stuff, they measure out dry ingredients in grams. So things that don't weigh a whole lot are measured in grams. A lot of times, food portions are measured out in grams. A book, the weight of a book is also described as like a kilogram. So a kilogram, remember, that's going to be 1,000 grams. So a book would be like 2,000 paper clips, if you will, or 1,000 grams, if you will. So a kilogram is 1,000 times bigger than a gram. So it's used to weigh much heavier things. So like if you go into gyms and stuff, if you're lifting weights, a lot of times you hear them use the word kilo, things that are measured in weights. So a lot of times, if you're in a doctor's office, medicines, they have to know how much you weigh in kilograms, so they can actually make sure they're prescribing the right amount of strength of medicine with respect to your weight, which has to actually be in kilograms, since most medicines are measured in the metric system as well. A milligram is a very tiny weight. So like if you have an aspirin, if you knock off a little slither of an aspirin, that's what a milligram is. It's very, very tiny. Some people call it like a grain of sand is a milligram. So it's very, very tiny. It's not much. It's almost invisible. So remember, like a milligram is 1,000 times smaller than a gram. So if I have a 1 milligram, 1 milligram would be like 0.001 grams. So like if you had this right here, if you divide that into 1,000 pieces, that would represent a gram. So notice how it's going to be very, very tiny. So a milligram measures things that are very small. But that's why they use aspirin there, because most often, if you look at, if you're taking medicines, the strength of the medicine is measured in milligrams of the active ingredient. So most commonly, like, a lot of us take Tylenol or ibuprofen and things like that, and usually, there's a number of milligrams on the bottle. So we have to pay attention to milligrams when we're doing medicines. Liter is a common unit as well when it comes to liquid capacity. So again, when it comes to lengths, we have meters, kilometers, centimeters, and millimeters. When it comes to weight, we have grams, kilograms, and milligrams are the most commonly used. When it comes to liquid capacity, liter is one of the more common ones. So a liter would be like when we think about soft drinks, or gasoline can be sold in liters in other countries. So that's what they have to watch out for when you talk about price of gasoline in other countries. They don't sell gasoline by the gallon; they sell gasoline by the liter. And a liter is not exactly 1 gallon. They're close, but they're not the same. So we also have what's called a milliliter. A milliliter, again, is back into medicines. A milliliter is like what you put into like a liquid medicine. It would be a lot of times, like if you ever have a droplet thing, a milliliter is like one little droplet of, of medicine. Something else they bring out here is cubic centimeters. So if you see the CC, that stands for cubic centimeter. That's the same thing as 1 milliliter. So 1 cc is also the same thing as 1 milliliter. Those are related together. So when it comes to liquids, mostly just liter and milliliter is about all you really will see. Now, when it comes to converting within the metric system, the prefix table can be used. This is sometimes remembered as a little phrase or an acronym. King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. So if you recall back in the day when you learned this in your elementary schools, it's still a good way to remember the prefix table. So King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk stands for the prefixes kilo, hecto, deca, units, deci, centi, milli. So when converting within the metric system, it's all about knowing King Henry. So all we really have to do is mentally place the decimal to the given position and then move it to the conversion position. So what I mean by this is, if I want to find the missing measures of 43 decameters, and if we want to convert that to centimeters, what I can do is use the King Henry as a way to remember the prefix table. So King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. So decameter is located here. And what I need to do is convert to the centimeters. Remember, since this is a base 10 system, all you have to do is know how many places the decimal's got to move. So it's got to move to the units place, to the deci place, to the centi place. So it's got to move to that spot. So it's 1, 2, 3 moves. So decimal has got to move 3 places. So since 43, the decimal's on the end, I have to move it 1, 2, 3 places to the right, which means I have to add 3 zeros for placeholders. So in the end, this becomes then 43 with 3 zeros. So in other words, it's going to be 43,000 centimeters. If I have 2.5 decigrams and I want to convert that to milligrams, again, it's all I have to know is the metric prefixes. So we use the acronym King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. So remember, the big D is deca, the little d is decigram. So this actually stands for the DK over here. So if I have 2.5 decagrams, using King Henry, we have to move to the milligram spot. So it's going to be 1, 2, actually, I'm not the right spot in my timeout. We got little d, don't we? Little d is deci. So we're actually starting here with our decimal, and it's got to move 1, 2 places to the right. So my decimal, the 2.5, has got to move 2 places to the right. So therefore that becomes 250 milligrams as my conversion. So notice how bigger to smaller, the numbers are easier to deal with. It's the other way around that gets a little more confusing. But with the metric system, it's not that big a deal because all you're doing is moving the decimal. So find the indicated measure. If I have 3,495 liters and I want to convert that to kiloliters. So we have King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. Notice how liters is the no prefix. That means we're at this spot. And I have to convert to kiloliters, which is the big K. So it's 1, 2, 3 to the left is where my decimal's got to move to. So if I have this 3,495, I'm actually going to not use the comma. It gets confusing. Leave the comma out. So my decimal's here at the end, and I have to move the decimal 3 places to the left. 1, 2, 3. So it becomes then, 3,495 liters is the same thing as 3.495 kiloliters. Because remember, kiloliters is 1,000 liters. So I only need a few of those to get up to that spot. So if I want to convert 2.78 centimeters to decameters, so we have this King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. So notice how we can do all this without a calculator. That's where some people are like, huh? Yeah, well, you can. So if I have centimeters and I want to convert to decameters, that's the big D. This is the deca here. So if I'm here, I got to go 1, 2, 3 to get to the deca. So if I have 2.78, I got to move the decimal 3 places to the left. 1, 2, 3. I have to use 2 zeros as placeholders. So that means that 2.78 centimeters is the same thing as 0.00278 decameters. So that's a unit of length. So adding or subtracting numerical values, notice how, again, we have to have like common units of measurement to actually add things together. So we have to have a common unit. So if I want to add 9 milliliters to 2 centiliters, we can't actually add that until they're the same unit. So remember, it's easier to go bigger to small. And since centiliters is actually a bigger unit of measurement than milliliters, I want to convert the 2 centiliters to milliliters. So remember, if I use King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk, I'm at centiliters and I want to convert to milliliters, which means I have to move the decimal 1 place to the right. So 2 centiliters equals then 20 milliliters. So then I can just go 9 milliliters plus 20 milliliters, and that gives me 29 milliliters. If I want to subtract 14 kilometers from 34 hectometers, again, it's easier to convert bigger to smaller. And since kilometers is bigger than hectometers, it's a good idea to change kilometers to hectometers. So remember, we have King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. So it's easy to go bigger to smaller. So that means to move 1 place to the right. So this turns into 140 kilometers minus 34 kilometers. And therefore we have 106 kilometers. Because 140 take away 30 is 110, and then take away 4 would give me 106. So I can kind of do that mentally. Instead of subtracting 34, I'm just subtracting 30 and 4 to do it mentally.